Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 12th of May 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, and joining me today is David Scott. Hello, David. Welcome to the programme.
Hello, Mike. Welcome to sunny Perth. It's the sun's out for the fourth straight day here. We don't know quite what it's all about, but we're all getting a nice tan.
You sent me a satellite photo of Scotland yesterday to prove that it was sunny there. I mean, this is highly unlikely.
It does seem difficult to believe, but there you are. Evidence would suggest it is in fact sunny.
Okay, well, let's get started here because corruption is the order of the day, and many of the mainstream papers carrying some form of article or story about corruption. The Times choosing to tell us that David Cameron has announced that we're going to punish banks for fraud by staff. So any kind of money laundering or any kind of fraud by staff, we're going to fine the banks. Nothing about actually prosecuting the people concerned. And certainly following 2008, we've had very, very few prosecutions, if any, that have been successful. Of course, this is because Cameron is hosting his first global anti-corruption summit today. We'll talk about that in a second. But it seems to me a bit unlikely, David, that if we're going to fine banks, that they won't just print the money.
Or take it from the shareholders' funds or someone else's funds. Whatever happened to people who commit fraud going to jail? I thought that was the required punishment.
Unless you're a banker. And the other big story is that the Prime Minister has promised a crackdown on dirty money. And this is quite incredible. So this is Britain's property market heated up by foreign investors. And he's saying that foreign companies that own property in the UK are going to have to state the assets that they have publicly. And this apparently is to prevent money laundering. He's clearly concerned about this Chinese money coming into the country that he doesn't know where it came from. But this, of course, as I say, was all to warm people up for the anti-corruption summit, which is taking place today. David Cameron gave a sterling introduction to it when he basically said nothing much. But except for that the UK will be the first country in the G20 to have a public register of beneficial ownership. So everyone is going to see who really owns and controls each company. I don't think that's very likely. I think, we'll come on to this in a bit more detail in a moment, but I think too many people have worked out how to make these offshore companies work, these offshore trusts and so on, and they're wanting to crack down a bit on that.
Yes, I mean, it's a very strange thing for David Cameron to be saying he wants to crack down on dirty money. Is he defining dirty money as foreign money? Or is it just the wrong sort of foreign money? Because where would you start? You would start with the CIA and the drug link, the heroin link. You would start with the mass production of shell companies in certain places in London. Let's leave the Chinese alone for just a day or two and sort out our own dirt first.
And indeed, this is one of the points that's being made by many people. Now, Christine Lagarde, just when you think it couldn't get any worse, she said that while the direct economic costs of corruption are well known, the indirect costs may be even more substantial and debilitating. Corruption also has a broader corrosive impact on society. It undermines trust in government and erodes the ethical standards of private citizens. And this is coming from the head of the International Monetary Fund, which between it and the World Bank, they haven't exactly been honest in their dealings with third world countries, David, over the years.
They haven't. I would feel that there's quite a number of third world countries listening to that and thinking, well, where was that sort of idea when you were ripping off our people and taking us into economic catastrophe, dear IMF? I mean, they've not entirely been good news for those who have borrowed money from them, have they?
No, indeed. Right. Now, we were discussing this a little bit before the programme, so we'll carry that discussion on in a second. But I showed this. This was the disclaimer from the ICIJ website because they published quite a lot of data, and they did it actually in a very good way. They've made it quite visual and so on. But before you get access to that website, you're being asked to click on this disclaimer. And the first line of this disclaimer is there are legitimate uses for offshore companies on trusts. So we'll talk about that in a second. Now, during the first plenary today, one of the comments from the audience from the Mo Ibrahim Foundation was that legitimate business has no need for anonymous companies, please ban them. David Cameron's response to that was, if every country moves towards a public register of beneficial ownership, this problem will be solved. But unfortunately, as the Financial Times pointed out this morning, already the Cayman Islands has said that they have no intention of getting involved in any kind of offshore register of beneficial interests. They're saying that the transparency drive, according to the FT, the transparency drive backed by David Cameron is pointless. And they're saying that they asked to participate in today's conference, but they weren't able to do that because they wanted to give another side to the coin. So apparently that wasn't part of the script for today, and so they weren't allowed to take part. And the FT reporting that Wayne Panton, who's the Minister of Financial Services in the Cayman Islands, said that they already had a more effective approach to rooting out wrongdoing than the approach favoured by the Prime Minister, which requires companies to list their ultimate owners on a public register. He said the small element of abusers of the international financial system, very good. They are the very people who are not going to be honest with voluntary disclosures. Well, I think there's something reasonable in that point. So, David, this issue of hidden ownership of companies and beneficiary ownership of companies, what's your view on it? Because it is a tricky one. You could say that on one hand, full disclosure allows governments to control what people are doing. But on the other hand, as you pointed out to me earlier, people who don't disclose therefore can have hidden conflicts of interest. So where do we go with this?
Yes, I think companies themselves are a slightly strange beast because they are legal fictions. They are things which have a personality, a legal personality, but they're not alive. So it's a slightly odd term to start with. The issue you get here is it's a comparison of threats. The presence of government in these things tends to skew everything because you have this organisation which has a geographical monopoly on the use of violence. And it has a legalised form of theft called taxation. And it uses the funds which it gets from this to oppress us, to loot and divide us more and oppress us in large ways and small. So the people who have had the experience of the tender mercies of our own government in such areas as forced adoption and the failure and cover-up of child sexual abuse will have a very poor opinion of what the government is doing with all the money that it steals. Now, in order to steal, it wants full transparency. It wants to know where all of your assets are. And private individuals, in the name of liberty, want to maintain as much anonymity as possible. The reason the government doesn't like cash is it's anonymous and they can't track it. So while I really feel that having anonymous ownership is an invitation to corruption, and we should have transparency on ownership of companies so we can see where people's interests lie. I do have a certain amount of sympathy for people who are using this to maintain some freedom of movement and financial freedom to escape the desperate clutches of our ever greedy wise overlords.
Do you think it's unfair to suggest that this is a bit like gun control? Because as the gentleman from the Cayman Islands said, those who are really determined to hide their activities aren't going to pay the slightest bit of attention to this anyway.
I think it's exactly like gun control. That's the first thing that came to mind when you recounted this quote from the gentleman in the Cayman Islands. Gun control is a fine means of getting legitimately owned guns out of peaceable hands, but it doesn't really do very much for gangsters and crime because they can still get weapons, and it means you have an unarmed populace unable to resist. But of course, in this area, the biggest gunslinger of all is in fact the government and Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs.
Absolutely. And which brings us nicely to this, because we've been saying for quite a long time now that this corporation tax scandal was the precursor to this whole thing. And we're saying that this has been ushering in a globalized tax regime. So this article written in 2013, Bilderberg in 2013, we believe, was the launch of this initiative. And we've seen press reports really building up to the point of this anti-corruption scandal today, summit today, and Reuters then pointing out that Panama and Lebanon have now joined this global tax information sharing deal, and this is being run through the OECD. 100 countries now signed up to this already, this looks like the goal for this, David. This isn't about hiding money laundering dealing with money laundering or dealing with any kind of fraud or corruption. It's actually about a globalized tax regime.
Yes, it's definitely not about dealing with money laundering, as the entire system depends on money laundering. The only genuine liquidity coming into the stock market is drug money, and it depends on it the way you and I depend on a blood supply. The nature of global tax. I've had a couple of goes at this. A few years ago, we were trying to persuade everyone that we need a carbon tax. We need to tax carbon dioxide, which is essential to life, as though it was a pollutant. And this would generate a global taxation infrastructure. That one didn't fly. That one didn't pass the giggle test. But we will see this more and more. We'll come back to this. We've had people persuaded that taxation is somehow good and just, and you must consent to have your work, the produce of your work, stolen by the government, who will keep most of it and distribute it a little bit of it to the poor, and that's somehow a more just system. The next stage is to do this on an international basis, where we'll gut countries like the United Kingdom, and we'll use it to fund an international system of oppression, which will be dressed up to look like some form of care on an international scale.
Well, it was interesting. John Kerry was speaking this morning, and he didn't mention US tax havens at all. Now, we showed this article from the FT a couple of days ago, and halfway down this article is a graph showing the number of trust companies and the absolutely exponential growth in trust companies in South Dakota, for example, since 1996. So there's assets and companies growing hugely. Kerry didn't mention this at all.
And what's the role of Wall Street in all of this, do you think? Is this a big surprise to Wall Street? Have they no idea this is happening? Or are they actually driving it? Our friends in the City of London, are they the people who are actually principally driving money offshore? Maybe we should look to them to carry some of the responsibility for this.
Absolutely right. Now, is big banks financing the EU referendum? Is that corruption? I don't know, but here we are, bankrolled by fat cats. Big US banks fund Dave's EU fight to the tune of £2 million. This is in the Mail, obviously, and this is the Britain Stronger in Europe group. They've received £2 million from the likes of Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and Citibank, and of course these banks have all had to pay fines to various governments for mis-selling mortgages. They've got a lot of a lot of questions still to answer following 2007, 2008. And this is the official Britain Stronger in Europe group, which is backed by David Cameron. And we can just add this £2 million onto the £9 million already spent by the government. totally against the rules even of the European Union that the government spend money or even take any kind of partisan position on this. So this surely must be a form of corruption, David.
Yes, and it's always very interesting to follow the money in situations like this. One of the pieces of information which was excluded from Churchill's book on the Second World War at the insistence and request of a former Chancellor of Germany who preceded Hitler was who was funding the Nazi Party. The two largest funders of the Nazi Party in the early 1930s, late 1920s were in fact Jewish Berlin bankers, and that was viewed as not being politically sayable in the 1950s, so it was left unsaid.
We should probably also mention the Bush family in that particular discussion.
And the Bush family were heavily involved, and in fact, even ran into some legal difficulties over the Trading with the Enemy Act.
Absolutely. Now, you wanted to mention this Spectator debate on leaving the EU.
Yes, this is on YouTube, and it's quite interesting, and it's worth a look. Daniel Hannan, who's always excellent, was on it. Nigel Farage was there. He was very good as well. And the Leave side were, shall we say, very much in the ascendancy. They turned the audience to their side, and it was very noticeable how there was the contrast between the audience reaction between those who supported Leave, who were energised and enthusiastic and involved with the debate, and those who favoured Remain, the Romanians as they're now called, who were very much more quiet, subdued, disinterested. The excitement very much lies with the Leave campaign.
Okay, but we should remember, I think, that the Telegraph mentioned in 2000, in fact, that Euro-federalists are financed by the CIA. But this doesn't seem to be a subject which has managed to creep into the debate just yet.
It's not made a huge impact, no. Although I see the Telegraph is reporting this once again, that under the banner of Brexit, that we're going to have to watch what's happening with the CIA. But it seems that the CIA, large banks, it's quite clear where the global interest lies, where the powers that be want us to place our ballots. But what seems to be happening in the country, something I sense, I hope I'm right, is that line, that type of persuasion isn't working anymore. It's not having the traction it once had. People are much less likely to believe the BBC, believe the official lines, believe David Cameron, for example, and much more likely to think for themselves. So we'll see. It's going to be tight, but it may well go the way of freedom.
Well, if it does, that's really when the work really begins, because, and this is the danger, isn't it, though, that if people vote to come out, we potentially face a couple of years or a lot of years of chaos and discussion and fighting about how we come out, and all that while all kinds of evils can be hidden under the surface while the debate is publicly about how we get out. So there's got to be a danger there, and
there's always a danger when whatever the people vote for, whatever the people wish, when you have the political leadership we have in this country, there's always a danger.
Absolutely. Now, of course, this isn't the only referendum that we could be looking at here, because it looks very much like Nippy is about to start a new campaign.
Yes, the first clue we got was this little tweet, to Jimmy D, who didn't make it back into Parliament. He was one of the few SNP members who'd expressed any doubts at all about named persons, so he didn't make it back in. And here's someone saying how disappointed they were, but there's every confidence you'll bounce back, especially in the summer indie campaign. We didn't know at that point we were going to have a summer indie campaign, but it transpires that yes, we are. And the nationalists here are going to relaunch a a campaign for independence this summer, which is a strange choice in some ways. It reflects a couple of realities. It reflects a reality that the campaign that they had under Alex Salmond, the points they made under Alex Salmond, were largely fallacious. Right? They were based on an economic case that was just imaginary and has been shown now to be imaginary. It was based on lots of free stuff, vote for independence and whatever your heart desires is just around the corner. As soon as we stop the nasty English stealing all of our stuff, everything will be fine. You can have everything. You won't need to work. You'll be able to work less hard, get more free things. Everything will be wonderful. Now, that's just a lie, right? It's a hard world out there. It's a world of scarcity. And whatever political arrangements we have inside the UK or anywhere else, the only way forward is the old-fashioned way of going forward, which is hard work, saving, helping your fellow man along the way, and honesty and property rights. Things like this, things that were not being discussed. So they're saying they're going to build a new case. I've no confidence that it will be any sounder than the previous case, but at least they realise that the case they made for independence lies in tatters.
What is the reaction going to be from the Scottish public, having had a referendum and now an EU referendum? Are they going to just turn off to another Scottish referendum? And if that's the case, what would the likely outcome be?
I can't imagine they'll generate a great deal of excitement in Scotland now. They've had the debate. The vote came down in favour of remaining in the UK. Most of the people who made that decision are still firmly of the view that they were correct. I don't see. There may well be a fatigue element here. There may well be, not again. Give us peace. It will enthuse the core support. There's a 1/3, 30% or thereby, hardcore pro-independence view in Scotland, and that's been solidly there for many years, and it may well enthuse them. I don't think it will make a great deal of impact beyond that.
Yeah, okay. Just a couple of reminders of events. Now, of course, there's no UK column news tomorrow, which is why David is joining us today, because we're on our way up to AV7. And we'll be on our way back down from AV7 on Monday, so there'll be no UK column news on Monday either. But on Tuesday, we'll be back. And then on the evening of Tuesday, Vanessa Beeley speaking in Frome, in the Wheat Sheaves pub, Bath Street. If you can get along to that, please do. And then Alex G has asked me to give a shout out for a campaign he's running on the VOOM website, which is part of Virgin Media. And he's really looking for a bit of support in this, basically Virgin are wanting to run some projects, and his Hereward Television project is part of this. So please give him a vote, and hopefully we'll see Doomwatch back on the internet pretty soon. Moving on from that then, I wanted to highlight this article in Global Research, weaponizing the term conspiracy theory. Disinformation agents and the CIA. This is from Dr. Gary Coles. And he says, conspiracy theory is a term that strikes fear and anxiety in the hearts of almost every public figure, particularly journalists and academics. Since the 1960s, the label has become a disciplinary device that has been overwhelmingly effective in defining certain events as off limits to inquiry or debate, especially in the United States. Raising legitimate questions about dubious official narratives destined to inform public opinion and thereby public policy is a major thought crime that must be cauterized from the public psyche at all costs. And he describes a CIA document which originates this term. He says it wasn't very many years after the World Wide Web became operational that it was contaminated by secret disinformation agencies and also by individuals that were eventually called internet trolls. Trolls began interjecting themselves uninvited and unwanted into otherwise useful and productive conversations involving web groups of like-minded individuals. These trolls, intent on scurrilously confusing various website commenters, seemed to delight in angering angering up certain online groups. Typically, a lot of time and effort was wasted in such fake arguments before members of the group finally realised that they'd been ambushed by a disinformation agent. And then he goes on to say, as one prime example, the CIA, which by law is forbidden to have anything to do with domestic affairs, because that's the FBI's job, has been a huge disinformation agency for as long as it has been in existence. The CIA institutionalized the term conspiracy theory in its very successful attempts to derail the honest attempts to investigate roles of various governmental agencies and individuals that were involved in the execution of President Kennedy. Then he goes on to highlight Andrew Wakefield as another example, and at the end he gives a bunch of definitions. It's a very interesting article. The question is, David, do you think conspiracy theory it has been weaponized, but does that weapon have any real power anymore? I mean, going back to the late 90s, it seemed to me that it was much more limiting on conversation to have what you were saying just written off as conspiracy theory, whereas today I'm not quite sure that it still has the same punch.
I think that's right. So many things which were the conspiracy theories of yesterday are now established fact. So that the term is certainly losing its impact. I remember seeing Murray Rothbard, we're about to come to a Rothbard article, Murray Rothbard, probably early 80s, asked about this. And he said, I don't believe in conspiracy theories. But conspiracies are happening all the time, left and right, mostly left. And I'd say that was accurate at the time. It's perhaps now mostly right. But there are plenty of conspiracies. You don't need the theory. All you need to do is to try and plot what's happening and join up the dots. One of the things the internet has provided us with is so much more information, hard, factual information, government documents, things that you can access to see what they're saying to one another. And that's revealing much more of what's going on behind the scenes. And I don't see them being able to turn the tide on that.
Perhaps one of the difficulties that the free media, if we want to call them that, has, including ourselves, is that many of the conspiracy theories and inverted commas that we're discussing are quite complex. It's very difficult to describe them in a few words, and therefore there has to be a certain amount of investment in time and effort by the reader or the viewer in order to get to grips with what's being discussed. So that perhaps is the biggest challenge that we have to counteract whenever the term conspiracy theory is thrown at us.
Yes, there is a lot of intellectual work required to fully understand how some of these things operate, how the public is fooled, what ideas are being placed in people's minds, and how the truth is being perverted. But it requires much less intellectual development to have a clear idea of right and wrong, of lies and falsehood, and an understanding that our wise overlords are very often lying to us. And once you've got those two building blocks, you can start to ask questions, and that's enough to make a start.
Okay, well, let's move on then to Israel. Tell us about this annexation bombshell, which is on the cards here.
Well, this is Area C, I think it's defined, which is 60% of the West Bank. And the word on the street here from the Maariv newspaper is that there's going to be a bill placed in front of the Knesset very shortly, in coming weeks, calling for the annexation of the whole area. Now, at the moment it's under military occupation, which means the people there, apart from Israeli citizens who are there as illegal settlers, as worldwide opinion would mostly have it, the people apart from Israeli citizens have no vote, are not part of Israel. They're simply under military occupation. So what this would do would be bring all of those settlers into Israel proper. The Arab population that comes in along with them would be defined as Israeli Arabs. They would get a vote in Israeli elections, and the land, etc., would become part of the State of Israel. This is a further removal of Palestinian land. The idea of having two states in what was British Mandate Palestine, subdividing land, which was originally put forward in 1937 by the British Royal Commission, it has been forever looking weaker as the two states have become more and more unequal, and we've now got the remains of the Palestinian land simply being Gaza, and a whole series, now only 40% of a whole series, of disconnected enclaves within the West Bank. It's not possible to make a country from this. It's simply not feasible. And really, in many ways, Israel-Palestine was always one country in terms of infrastructure, road network, water systems, power systems, and all the rest of it. And it's going to head towards being one country again. The difficulty is we're going to have to find a way where everyone can live together in peace and freedom in that part of the world.
That's what I was going to hint at. Where does this end?
Well, it doesn't end well, because what happened last time was there was ethnic cleansing. 1947-48, there was enormous ethnic cleansing. 700,000 Palestinians were driven out of what is currently Israel, and a similar number of Jews were expelled from Arab lands round about. So you have two peoples who cannot live together. There's a huge tendency for people to be displaced from their homes, their land stolen, and there to be a great deal of suffering of almost entirely innocent people in the process. The tendency is this ends up in war.
Yes. Okay, well, Haaretz is talking about the Israeli flag.
Yes, the Israeli flag's quite an interesting thing. Now, the flag here, it's quite an interesting article to go through the origin of it. A few people might be a little surprised as to just what the origin is. The so-called Star of David, which is the hexagram, only became associated with the Jewish people in the 17th century. That's how recent it is. It's an occultic symbol like the pentagram, which has also got a Jewish significance. And it was viewed by Middle Ages Jewish mystics as something that warded off the evil eye and warded off evil spirits. So that's the origin. Absolutely nothing to do with David. And the two stripes, now there's two views here. The view put forward in Haaretz here is the blue colour came from the prayer shawl, which is, well, some prayer shawls were blue, but that was more of a fashion statement than anything else. The other view is that the two stripes represent the two rivers, and the idea here is it's to be entirely Jewish from the river to the river. That's from the Nile to the Euphrates.
So this is the Greater Israel Project?
Greater Israel Project. So this, which was the original flag of Zionism, the flag of the Israeli state is the original flag of Zionism. And the option here is that you've got one of two flags in the world, the other one being the flag of the Republic of Ireland, which actually contains within the flag graphic a claim to land in someone else's sovereign territory.
Right. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we mentioned the Palestinian killed by the soldier, and Times of Israel are reporting that there's a new video. What's in it?
New video, and what it's showing is the claims made by the soldier that the Palestinian who's subdued and shot and lying on the ground was moving and twitching and heading towards a knife when he was shot is shown not to have any correlation with the facts. So it seems that would be an excuse made up to justify the action after the killing, and not a genuine reason for the soldier's actions. So the trial goes on, but the information that's coming out is not very good for the soldier who is on trial. We've also had the deputy head of the IDF speaking this week at a memorial service, And this is another case which we've raised before of the Israeli Defense Force paradoxically and really surprisingly becoming a voice for restraint. Now, this is not necessarily that the IDF have become much more moderate, but rather Israeli society has become much more radicalized and much more inherently violent, and that the IDF, being a disciplined and organized force, is actually being a restraining influence. Now, the person was Major General Yahia Golan, and he was talking at Holocaust Remembrance Day. And he said, if there's something that frightens me about Holocaust remembrance, it's the recognition of the revolting processes that occurred in Europe in general, and particularly in Germany back then, 70, 80, 90 years ago, and finding signs of them here amongst us today in 2016. Now, he was speaking in Israel about the moves in Israeli society. As you can imagine, that comment got a lot of flack from right-wing sources in Israel, but I think it was really rather brave of him to say it.
Well, somebody else who's speaking out quite a lot these days is Paul Craig Roberts, formerly, I think he was Reagan administration, wasn't he? And this is sort of relevant, bearing in mind the furore which has kind of fallen off the media spotlight at the moment surrounding the Labour Party. But he is saying Zionist Israel hides its crimes behind its smears of truth tellers. He starts off by saying, several years ago, two very distinguished American scholars wrote a book, The Israel Lobby. The book made a very understated case that the Israel lobby has far more power over US government and media than is good for America or Israel, as it silences constructive critics who are Israel's friends. The two scholars were demonized by the Israel lobby as advocating the return of the Holocaust. The Israel lobby presented itself as just a poor little weak thing, unable to stand up to all the Nazis assailing Israel. Meanwhile, the US Congress was unanimously passing outrageous resolutions handed to it by the Israel lobby. And he goes on to say only Russia can bring the terrorism in the Middle East that the dolts in Washington created to an end. The low-grade morons in Washington sponsored the terrorism in order to bleed the American taxpayer of money to pay the profits of the military security complex that Eisenhower, a five-star general, warned us about going on 7 decades ago. And he says, I became an anti-Semite, in inverted commas, when I observed that Israel's treatment of the Palestinians resembled the Union Army's treatment under Sherman and Sheridan of the American Plains Indians, wholesale genocide. As an Israeli official wrote to me asking me why I criticized Israel for doing to the Palestinians what the United States government did to the Native Americans. In other words, the Western world and Israel that allegedly suffered the Holocaust were not required to make any moral progress in 1 or 2 centuries. Whatever the Union war criminals did to the American Plains Indians in the 19th century is perfectly okay for Israel to do to the Palestinians in the 21st century. So much for those who believe in moral progress. And then he goes on to say that anti-Semite has lost its sting because every justified criticism of Zionist Israeli government is declared to be anti-Semitism. But this is now really, the lid has come off this whole subject, and more people prepared to speak out and call it as it is. This is a bit like the term conspiracy theory. Anti-Semitism increasingly isn't going to have the same effect that it may have once had.
Well, this is it. We have this term bandied around constantly. I was amazed to be called an anti-Semite by, in fact, a very leading Jewish writer and editor of the leading Jewish magazine in Britain. And why was I called an anti-Semite? Because I was defending the reputation of a Jew. It was just a Jew he didn't like. That Jew is critical of Israel, and that made the Jewish gentleman, a guy called Gilad Atzmon, an anti-Semite, and it made me one for simply saying, no, the points he's raising are significant and important and should be listened to. So it becomes this constant yell when people say, let's look at the facts, let's think about this, anti-Semite, anti-Semite. And after a little while, it starts to simply become background. People get used to recoil initially from the term because it's so awful with the connotations of Nazi Germany and everything that happened. But after a little while, I say, well, no, there's more to talk about than this, and eventually it loses its sting. In exactly the same way that, you're a conspiracy theorist. It loses its sting when more and more and more of the conspiracies are proven to be true.
This has got to be dangerous for the Jewish community in general, though, because if it does lose its sting, if it is overused in that way, the potential is that legitimate criticism of people that have been genuinely anti-Semitic won't carry the same weight either.
Exactly so. The biggest losers in this, just as in the 1930s and the 1940s, is very likely to be the ordinary Jewish citizen, either in Israel or elsewhere in the world. The leadership of the Jewish nation in Germany, as has been recently discussed by Ken Livingstone, have had a history of working with and cooperating with the Nazi regime. The people who suffered on the ground suffered largely because, or in part because, of that poor leadership, looking to exploit short-term opportunities to further their political goals and ignoring the long-term threats and existential threats to the individual people on the ground. So yes, I think the use of this term and the overuse of the ability to silence opposition, the ability to control the press, the ability to use Jewish power. Gilad Atzmon mentioned before. He says, what is Jewish power? Jewish power is the ability to stop anybody talking about Jewish power. It's the ability to close down this debate. Eventually that backfires. Eventually there's a reaction. What we should have is openness and honesty and a bit of candour about what happened in the 40s and the 30s, what's happening now, the whys, all of it, including awkward bits and bits that don't fit in the common narrative.
Indeed. Right, let's move on then. Tell us about detention centres and child sexual abuse.
Well, this is an example of, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, being the most frightening words in the world. In America, we're having people coming in, they're going into detention centres, their families are going into detention centres, there's women, there's children. And these detention centres, which started off life as jails, are now being viewed as some sort of, centre for helping people and resettling them. And what we're finding is people are being exploited, abused, sexually abused within the government system. Just the same sort of thing as we've found in Lambeth and Islington and places in Britain, that these centres offer the opportunity for those who would exploit children in particular to find vulnerable people who are unprotected.
Now, I'm not familiar with the Sandusky case.
This was a coach in America, coaching and sport. College sport is a huge business in America, and attracts enormous crowds, and it's very big money. And the coaches and the college teams get a lot of attention. Now it transpires that one of the coaches was abusing the young men on the team, and it now and this had been going on for years. I mean, years and years of abuse, and it had not come to the attention of the police or the public or the university authorities or anything like this. And it now transpires that many people were aware of this inappropriate behaviour and abuse and did nothing. So it's slightly similar to the sorts of child sexual abuse problems we're seeing here, in that the cover-up is necessary for the abuse to continue.
Now, I have to say, this is a first. I never expected to have Oprah on the UK Column News.
Well, yes, and it was, to be fair to Oprah, it was a good piece. This was 200 men who'd suffered child sexual abuse, talking very candidly about what had happened and the effect it had on their lives. I do recommend people to seek this out on YouTube. It's like all these things, it's a hard watch, but it's necessary to see what the reality of the situation is.
Okay, and briefly on this one?
Yes, this is another article that I would recommend people seek out. It describes not only abuse which took place at the infamous Dolphin Square complex, and involved members who were senior in the military, senior in the Church of England, MPs, and the usual list of suspects, but also the nature of the police investigation. Because when this gentleman went to the police many years later, the perpetrator, the principal abuser, who had groomed him and had got him involved in this and who took him along to Dolphin Square, was still alive. And he went to the police and he said to the police everything that had happened. And he warned the police that this gentleman had a great many firearms in his large country house, and that this was a threat, and that before doing anything, they should go and remove the firearms, before informing the accused. The police did not remove the firearms. Not only that, before they went to arrest the accused man, they phoned him to warn him, and the result was he went out into the woods and he shot himself. So there is no justice. There is no chance to question the man about all of the other abusers, that he would know the names, he would know the dates, he would know who. Well, he's not going to talk now.
Well, a bit of good news. So we're going to congratulate the Holly Greig Justice blog because they've hit quite a target.
Yes, 1 million page views, and in fairly short order too. So it's a lot of work has gone into that. So I would just like to highlight this and say well done to everyone involved in Holly Greig Justice. Okay,
right. It's after 1:45, so we unfortunately need to move through this a little bit quickly, David. But tell us about repudiating national debt.
Yes, this is a long article on the Mises website written by Murray Rothbard. So anyone who's got an interest, please go and look at it. It looks at a vast array of things, including taxation and the fact that it's theft. But the core thing is, unlike a personal debt where you make a commitment, in terms of honour to someone else to borrow their money and then return it with an interest payment, and it's your work and your honour that you stand on. The government doesn't make any such promise. The government takes on the debt, but it's you and I and our children who have to work off that debt. We never made the commitment, so it's quite a different thing legally and morally repudiating government debt compared to private debt.
Yes, and BP. Well, BP is going to start a new drilling operation.
Well, BP are, yes, it's the west of Shetland. I don't know how big it is. It's 4.5 billion barrels, which is so it's 4.5 million barrels, I think it was, which is 4 days worldwide usage. So it's not a huge find, but it's a major investment going into the west of Shetland. There is long-term rumours that to the west of Scotland there's quite a lot of oil as well. And that the decision to go to the North Sea as opposed to the West Coast was a choice between two alternatives, and the fact that the nuclear submarines and Faslane naval bases on the west was the reason that the east was selected. I don't know how much oil is to the west of Scotland, but maybe there's quite a bit.
Surely oil to the west of Scotland belongs to Northern Ireland.
Well, but it's okay. So we're all one country. It's fine.
Right. Okay. And what's the Shanghai Accord then?
Right. This is a suggestion by Jim Rickards that there was a secret deal done in Shanghai, the G20 in February. Now the problem was the Chinese economy is a bug looking for a windshield. It's in terrible trouble. And it's going into recession, and there are huge social unrest implications for China. China needs to drop the value of its currency against its trading partners to make its exports cheaper in order to avoid a catastrophe. Now, normally if China just devalues, the American stock market tanks, so there's a problem here. So what they've done is they've had a coordinated policy between all of the central banks. So tightening in Europe, tightening in Japan, which are the two principal trading partners of China, and a loose money printing a loose money printing policy in America that has weakened the dollar. And as the yuan is linked to the dollar, it's weakened the Chinese currency against Europe and against Japan as a result, and nobody's noticed, so there hasn't been this reaction in the stock market. So it's a suggestion that there's essentially a conspiracy, if you want to put it that way, a coordinated policy between all the central banks of the world in order to manipulate currencies in order to bail out one nation against another. And of course, Mike, despite these people working for us, allegedly, we're not told anything about it.
Of course not. Okay, we're about out of time, David, so we're going to end with the Scots word of the day, which is kelpie.
Yes, kelpie. A kelpie is a mythical shape-shifting water spirit with satanic links, and has been the subject of a very major sculpture in the Scottish town of Falkirk.
Because it can be represented as a horse's head?
Yes. So these are the kelpies, and this is the point, that the place that the SNP chose for their photo op.
So this is Nippy and her kelpies?
This is Nippy and her kelpies, and yes, this is the 60. And here's a shot here of a shape-shifting satanic spirit and a kelpie.
But I can't tell which is which. Okay, brilliant, David. Thanks very much for joining us today. Thanks for everybody that's watched. I hope to see as many people as possible at AV7 over the weekend, and we'll be back as usual at 1 o'clock on Tuesday. Thanks and have a good weekend. Bye-bye.